Here we
I
go.
suppose.
Yeah, 'cause most of it's apart.
After the last one, it's going to be more.
All right, we got power now.
Exactly. Yep.
If you want, we can meet for lunch, go through this budget. I'll just explain what I know about the numbers. A lot of this stuff is passed through.
If the
Maybe
Republican Party's already endorsed that one.
$2 million. It doesn't mean we're short $4 million. It just means that whatever the project is, that's our stuff.
Yeah, understand that.
We got there's 262,600,000 deduct pays. So that number can be anything, doesn't matter when deduct pays. Okay.
All right, I will call the call meeting for May the 4th, 2017 to order. Again, remind everyone that this is one of our many budget work sessions for the upcoming budget for fiscal year 18, which will start July 1st, 2017 and run through June 30th, 2018. And we have a agenda, some different items to discuss, to hear from some of our department heads and constitutional officers. And while I appreciate the members of the public that came out this morning at 8 a.m. To listen, I also will remind you that there will be no public comment during the meeting. You'll have an opportunity, you can comment if you'd like, during our next regularly scheduled council meeting next Tuesday, May the 9th, during the non-agenda item session. And we'll also be holding a public hearing on May 23rd, at which time we invite and anticipate comment from the public at that point. So, with that being said, the first item on the agenda is an update on assessment values by the Commissioner of Revenue. Mr. Fry.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, citizens of Bristol, I have some good news to present to you today based upon some revised projections, but I want to say a few words first. This has been a very difficult year for our real estate department. We have a new assessment firm after 30 years of having been assessed by Blue Ridge Mass Appraisal. And keep in mind, this is a process that only comes along once every 4 years. We had a new real estate administration software package put in place this year, and that was primarily not of my choosing, but because the IT director had some very specific reasons why he felt we needed to move to this system. I have a new real estate deputy who's never been through general reassessment before. She's very good, but this is her first time at general reassessment. Because of the fact that we changed contractors, we got a late start in the year due to that change. The operating system we're now using is called ProVal. It's radically different from the old system that we used. We were trained in ProVal in February, but quite frankly, we're still learning all the bells and whistles of that system. And one of the final reasons this has been a difficult period for us is that we have seen almost 4 times the number of real estate appeals that we've seen in my 16 years as commissioner. When the budget process began this year, we were still hearing appeals because of the numbers of appeals. And quite frankly, we still have, I found out yesterday, 10 appeals from the Board of Equalization that haven't been given to us yet. They are meeting today to finalize those, and we will have them in hand by this afternoon. And I would also mention this is a little different in another respect, because during most of the years I've been commissioner, the budget's been passed in June. And this year we're passing the budget early in May. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's a different thing. On Tuesday morning at 12:55 p.m., I received an email from the city manager asking me to give her a complete count of the taxable assessed real estate values in the city. At that time, I had just gotten off the phone with Randy Eads, our city attorney, discussing the legal implications of the real estate issues at the Falls. And we had entered into an understanding between us and the city manager has since agreed to resolve that issue. But until that could be resolved, those values couldn't be inputted into the system either. We immediately, Tabitha needed this information right away. She had a budget hearing that night. So we quickly put the values in ProVal and ran the program. We didn't go through checking all the settings in the system before we ran the report like we usually do because of time constraints. And when the system showed that there was a $2 million shortfall, I was, to say the least, shocked. This did not make sense from what I had seen of the appeals, despite the unprecedented number of appeals this year. Tuesday was a crazy day. We had no time to check the result we gave to the city manager before we gave it to her. Upon reflection, the entire night, Tuesday, I began to realize there was a serious error. So yesterday, we went through the entire checklist of ProVal. We went through the entire process of the data, and we found an error. We reran the report. We came up with different and accurate numbers for the assessed value of taxable property and taxes generated for this year. We checked and rechecked that number. We had Tabitha and Tamara come down to our office, and we went through it with them, and they were satisfied that we came up with the correct numbers. We are certain these numbers are correct, subject to the 10 pending Board of Equalization appeals that we will receive this afternoon. I've talked to David Leonard. I've been told that he does not expect there to be any significant amount of money involved in these appeals. Most of them are second hearings involving additional evidence that is being presented by the taxpayer. The new values that we have found show an assessed value and a taxable amount that is well within the constraints of Tabitha's budget. They show a difference in a difference in the income of approximately $30,000 from the real estate income that was generated last year. They're within the 1% deviation, so no new rate setting is required by council based on Code of Virginia 58.13330. And so in summary, there is no huge shortage, as we temporarily thought Tuesday. Our real estate income is well within the current budget. And I apologize for giving everyone heart failure over this error. This was a rush job, to say the least. I wish I'd had more time to do it the way we usually come up with these numbers. And I would like to say something about some comments that were made in council. I've been criticized for not giving economic projections, and I will say that every year I sit down with the city manager and the CFO, and we come up with economic projections to the best of our ability. I'm not an economist. I've never pretended to be. And I've checked, and neither is any other commissioner of revenue in the state of Virginia. I looked at the statute on statutory duties for commissioner of the revenue. In no statute in the code does it state the commissioner should provide budget projections. Now, it's not that I'm not willing to do so, but as a legal matter, I'm not required to by the code. And Mr. Fleener will understand that based on the Dillon rule, if it doesn't say it, it doesn't exist as far as the law in Virginia. There was a comment that the state budget director said that there's no reason why I couldn't provide budget projections. Well, he's got a doctorate in economics, and he's got some people in his department that have degrees in economics. But I would point out that last year, based upon his economic projections, the state had a 5% shortfall, resulting in employees in the state not receiving a raise because it was outside the 1% allowed by the statute enabling the raise. And just so the public doesn't get this wrong, I didn't take any money from the city. I didn't steal any money. I didn't, if it were true, what came up, it wasn't me personally that cost people jobs. I would never intentionally do that. I was doing my statutory duty to ensure that each citizen had an appeal, a fair and equitable appeal, of the assessed value of their real estate based upon the due process of law principles in our Constitution. Hundreds of people in this town have gotten relief from their tax bills due to these hearings. And I was very upfront about trying to publicize these hearings this year. I mean, I went on TV, I went in the newspaper, I had a notice printed, we had a letter go out from Walperines. So, in my opinion, I have carried out my duties as Commissioner of the Revenue, and I take issue with those who say that I have not.
And so I will summarize on the screen where we are right now. The current real property tax included in the draft budget that was originally submitted, and I have changed that number to be $12,525,000 because I have added the DRI tax, because the numbers that I've gotten from the commissioner are for the entire city, so I want to compare apples to apples. The new total tax value now is $13,546,000. You take 94% of that. If you remember, that's working with the treasurer. That's the current collection rate. The revised real property tax the revised, yes, is $12,733,000, and so that leaves us with a budget surplus of $208,000, as opposed to the deficit that you heard the other night. I will say I did email the commissioner on Tuesday But that is not the first time I had asked for information concerning the assessment. So we are happy to bring you good news today.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've got lots of questions. Even though it's good news, right? It points to a bigger problem. It points to a huge issue with how the city manages its finances and how the state allows it to occur. If the law, as he says, doesn't require the Commissioner of Revenues as a constitutional officer to do certain important things, like report revenues by a specific date, give revenue projections on a periodic timetable, review all contracts that the city engages in that affect revenues, and they're allowed not to worry about that and kind of push it aside, right? Then the state and the municipalities are setting themselves up for failure. And if we have to go back to the state and issue pressure to change the state law, that has to happen. Because to have the Commissioner of Revenue's office saying they don't have responsibility for that is not okay. It's not okay, because you can't manage a municipality that way.
Mr. Mumpower, I was talking about
That's my
economic-
turn, it's my turn.
Okay.
So that's the first comment. Software installs, not reviewing contracts, ProVal system, new appraisal companies, all these things you listed. It sounded to me like you're saying you had no responsibility nor no authority to affect any one of those items. And I'm telling you, if I was Commissioner of Revenue and the IT guy came and said, we're going to put a new software install in, he's going to prove to me personally that it's not going to affect the city's revenue stream and what I project, or I'm not going to let it happen. I'll stop it. You just don't sit back and let things happen. You take control of the situation. The CFO and treasurer, you said people were verifying the numbers now. So was the last number we saw on Tuesday verified by anyone? Who actually financially verified that $1.7 million miss? Did the treasurer? Did the CFO? Did anybody?
Are you asking me to answer them?
We took the information provided by the Commissioner's office and did the math on the slide, but in terms of verifying the total tax, no. And I would mention on the software that was a committee decision, that we knew we were having issues with the current, and so I would certainly not say it was just the IT director's decision. It was a group of us that decided.
Okay, well, anything of that importance, the committee still cannot dictate if the constitutional officer disagrees with the impact, right? Verification. Publicly traded companies have to have two-person verification of their financials before they're submitted. So if we don't have anybody in the city putting their signature on the line and saying, we have verified these revenue projections, meaning the Commissioner of Revenue puts his name and signature on the line, and the CFO or the treasurer saying these are absolutely accurate, then we need to change the city charter to require that. Because you cannot put a number out of that importance that's not been verified by the financial side of the business.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
This is a little different situation than what you normally see, because we were in the process of appeals. Every day, a decision was made by the Board of Assessors or the Board of Equalization that changed the overall numbers to some degree. And as I said, we still have 10 appeals out there even today. I expect them to be very minor and certainly well within any deviation that would cause any problems with the budget. But I can certify a budget when the appeals have been completed. But until the appeals have been completed, I can't certify numbers because they change every day. They're continually changing. And quite frankly, it would make sense, I could have, I talked to David Leonard, he said he would have all the numbers from all the decisions he's made at the Board of Equalization by Wednesday. If we had waited till after I got all the numbers in, I would have had something certified and checked, and I guarantee you. But they were continually changing. And what you said, you mentioned a number of things that I said I didn't have the responsibility for. Some of those things, I don't recall exactly what they were. Some of those things I do have a responsibility for. What I was talking about specifically was the responsibility to make economic projections. Now, I have done it anyway. I've done the best I can. But I'm not an economist. I don't have a doctorate in economy like budgetary chief that you talk to. And
Doesn't
he
take
gets
an
his numbers
economist.
wrong all the time too, by the way.
Doesn't take an economist to do revenue projections. It takes good,
Okay.
solid financial people
Okay.
that understands the history of the revenue stream of this city, right? That has the ability to get on the phone and talk to the commissioner of revenue at the state level and start going through the numbers, even if you have to drive to Richmond, and you spend time doing that until you understand where the numbers are and how they've trended over the last 5 years, and you project them over the next 3 to 4 years. It's really not that hard of a process, and it does not take someone with a PhD in economics to do that.
One of the biggest, I think, variables in terms of the economy in this area right now is the mass number of people who are frequenting the Pinnacle. It seems to be increasing almost at an exponential rate. I've seen it in the numbers that I look at from businesses. I've heard it from businessmen. I live in Exit 7. I drive through that area all the time. I look at the parking lots and I compare them with what they were 2 years ago. And there's a significant decrease in traffic, a significant decrease in the cars that I see parked.
What's this got to
Those
do
are
with what we're
things-
talking about?
I don't know. I got a couple more comments. We're gonna wrap this up. Tuesday night should have never occurred. Okay? Should have never happened. And so if you sitting there saying that the numbers weren't ready to be verified,
They really weren't.
then you come in here and say the numbers are not complete and they have not been verified.
I did say
And they
that.
won't be verified, so I'm not giving you a number. So you don't throw any numbers up until they've been verified, because it doesn't make any sense to show something that's speculation of that importance.
These
So the
num-
lesson learned is don't ever do that again.
Absolutely.
You always have a verified number. Now, the excuse of this appraisal process and this whole review and appeal process has driven this out. You got control of that too. You get the attorneys and the board of review in here, and you have them in front of council, and we'll settle on a timeline. We'll settle on a firm timeline to when this stuff has to be done. And we'll pay overtime on Saturdays if that's what it takes to get it done. So you can't say that that process just goes and you have no control over it. You have control over that too, but you got to take control of the situation. My issue is I'm not seeing any control of the situation. I'm seeing kind of a hands-off, it's not my job, I don't have anything to do. That's my problem.
I'm not
And I can
saying-
read right through it, and I don't know if I'm the only one reading through it, but I have no patience for that. This is important stuff.
Yeah.
The city's jobs, the city's revenue stream, the city's viability for the next 2 to 5 years is at stake on these numbers. This is
Absolutely.
not something we just laugh about. And to throw up numbers that aren't accurate, I mean, how do you even do that? I mean, I don't get that at all.
Well, it really shouldn't be done until the appeals are completed. But I can tell you, those numbers are accurate except for the 10 pending appeals with the Board of Equalization. Other than the changes derived from that, those numbers I'm willing to certify.
Well, and your last point about the timeline, and you said that normally the budget's passed in June. The budget will be passed in June. What we're doing now is having our workshops and having our public hearing in May so we can get input from the constitutional officers, from the department heads, and the public. The 3 years that I've been on council, that has always happened on that timeline. And so to get to that point, to do it in May, that means the city manager, the department heads and the CFO start work generally in March, putting together the budget, especially once the General Assembly, and that's usually one of the bigger delays, is in the biennium year, because they have the longer session. They have to wait to get solid numbers from the General Assembly, but they even start work with anticipated numbers then. So you came in December and said, here's the initial assessment, here's the timeline. People have, I think, until the 1st of January to go to the assessor to that first round of appeals. And then I think they had to the end of January to sign up for the board appeals. And so there's been a delay in that process, knowing the whole time that we needed the book value to plug into the budget. Not the tax value, we need the book value. Angel Harris, the treasurer, needs the book value. She needed it 2 weeks ago, so she could send out the real estate bills for the first half, so she could get them out in a timely manner to the residents of the city. The city manager and the CFO needed it to develop the budget. I know that they have been asking you for this because I've been copied on the emails, some of them, that they've asked you for this information. So you've been there long enough, you should know the timeline that the city works on. To me, this is nothing, in the 3 years I've been on council, this is the same basic timeline. You've been there much longer, Terry. You should know this timeline and when people need information. So when you schedule all these Board of Equalization hearings, you should make sure those are wrapped up by the middle of March or the end of March. I understand that you can't get a solid number until that's done, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you took the effort to reach out to citizens, and a lot of them did, and I'm glad they did. You know, they went through the process and due process, but you need to schedule that process in such a way that it doesn't put a delay on the city, and that you're sitting here a week after the city manager presents a budget coming in and rushing through some numbers. I mean, all of that should have been done weeks ago. And that's my comment.
Can I make a comment?
Let me
Councilman
see
Hartley?
this.
We can't start the appeal process until the 2016 year was over. We started the appeals process earlier this year than we ever have. The first hearing occurred, I haven't checked it, but I believe mid-December, maybe even earlier than that. Even though the cutoff was supposed to have been the end of December, hearings went well into February for the Board of Assessors. And there was only a delay of a couple of weeks between that and the Board of Equalization. Part of that had to do with I hadn't received the order from the circuit court judge appointing the Board of Equalization. And the Board of Equalization has been meeting since that time, and actually will be even conducting a meeting today, as I just said. We are experiencing 4 times the volume of appeals this year than we've ever had previously. I was basing my judgment based upon my 3 previous general reassessments that I've gone through. Had we had anywhere near the normal number of appeals, we would have been finished well in advance. And as far as the numbers that Ms. Harris sent out, I would point out that there are always the first quarter numbers, the spring numbers, are always subject to adjustment in the fall, and that's true every year. And it's not unusual, and this is not the first time, that due to a general reassessment, appeals weren't complete by the time she did the billing, and there's a simple matter to handle that. Adjustments are made in the fall bill. At the time of the fall bill, either debits or credits are given. And there's nothing unusual about that. And that happens all the time. It happens every year for one reason or the other.
And I would just say, just because I don't want to belabor the point too much, but as you go through the process, those numbers are coming in. You know what these people appealed. They went to the assessors. They're not going to the Board of Appeals, so that number is not going to change. And you start a running total communicate back to the city staff and the treasurer. That's what was lacking here, is communication. And then again, you know, what I'm saying as far as managing this timeline, you know, as I say, you've done this before, maybe this was abnormal. But I would say whoever in 4 years, or maybe if we decide to do it in 2, the next time we do a reassessment, whoever your successor is, that they take a great pains to make sure that they schedule this in such a manner that it's done fairly. I think, you know, I do appreciate that, giving people the opportunity to appeal and their due process, but it has to be done in a timely manner because we need those numbers, because there's a lot that rides upon those numbers, and you can see just how in the last 48 hours, what coming in and throwing those numbers off to the different ways different people have reacted, from the council to the city staff to the employees, that thinking, you know, there's going to be this huge cut that just blindsided us. And so now that's not the case. And I think a lot of that can be done with better upfront manage, and I think that's part of Councilman Mumpower's point, but especially managing that timeline, because it's just like the budget process. We sat down and said, when do we need to get this from council? Well, we have to say, okay, it has to be enacted by the end of June. So to do that, we need a first reading, a second reading. Those have to be advertised. We have to have a public hearing. That has to be advertised. We have to leave time for these workshops. So that's how, you know, you work backwards from that. You know, I don't know when you thought you needed to get that final number, but I would have suggested it should have been at least working with the city manager a couple of weeks before she made her budget presentation to council. So, you know, if she could have said, I need this final number by mid-April, then you start working back in terms of those appeals. And if you got more people coming in, you work, like Councilman Mumpower said, you find a way to work around that, because we need that number so that we can do the due deliberations and know what we're facing.
I don't disagree with almost everything you've said, and I think there's lessons that my office has learned from this experience. Hopefully, we'll never be in a situation where all these things come together that causes such a crunch that we've had this year that we've never had before. I've never had this problem before. It's never been an issue at all.
Mr. Fry, let me say this briefly. It sounds to me, and I hope you're not saying this, that it almost sounds like I got a call from Tabitha Crowder on Tuesday, and we needed numbers, and you put together the numbers in before whatever time it was that day. That's how it sounds. Now, it may not be the case, but that's how it sounds. Like the first time you heard about this was Tuesday. I'm just saying, that's what, and if you really read between the lines, it sounds like, even though you know you've had to do this every year for 16 years, and now it's been new software that you got in February. It was, you know, didn't know how to operate it or glitch. There's been a new appraisal company, multiple more appeals, and so forth and so on. And, you know, but the point I'm making is I happened to be in 2 departments yesterday, one small in this city and one relatively large. And you know what the managers of those organizations in this city were doing at 11:30 yesterday? They were working through how they were going to cut. Now, you know, instead of being able to do the jobs that they're supposed to do, yesterday on Wednesday, and I'm sure that went across many departments, I'm sure at the police department, I'm sure it went across the fire department, you took not only a budget meeting, an easy, simple thing to do is, I don't know. You could have come in here and said, you know, Jeepers, these things happen. I'm not prepared to give you something that's close to X maybe. But instead, we got numbers that were shocking. And we as a council to work on this year's budget, we lost a night that we've been working on a budget. And, you know, I really think, as a citizen of Bristol, you know, that you really owe the employees and the people that came here an apology. I really do believe that.
I just did.
Well, I mean, I think you ought, when you see them out, every employee, I think you need to tell them, because I saw faces that were long yesterday. And thank God I ran into you at the courthouse when I was filing something yesterday, because I was able to pass on to a couple of places, hey, let's just hold off. This might not be right. Don't do anything yet.
I went
You know,
around
so I got to be a
I went
messenger.
around the courthouse and told them as soon as I found out.
So, but, I mean, that's my biggest concern, and, you know, emotions were pretty raw Tuesday,
I understand that.
and, everything, but it's only because, I mean, Jesus, I actually almost had tears in my eyes, because I was afraid we were gonna have to lay off some of the best people we've got. I mean,
Me too.
And that broke my heart,
Me too.
and it broke everybody else here's heart. And, please never let this, whoever wins this election, maybe it ought to be a training class and using the videos that we've had from these past 2 nights and simply say, don't let this happen again. I mean, that might be the
That
best
would be
training
a good,
session
that
ever.
would be a good case study. But let me mention a couple things real quick. Number one, after we were trained on ProVal, Lisa Hartman, my real estate deputy, made changes from the appeals. Every time she got an appeal in, she made the change that day. So we were tracking the appeals as much as possible. But I might add that, keep in mind, it's not my office that's doing the appeals. It's separate bodies. It's, in one case, it's Wamplerines, in another case, it's the Board of Equalization. I can't control how fast they move on their appeals. That's subject to their schedules and their ability to process the appeals. They got a lot more than they expected too. David Leonard will tell you that he was shocked at the number of appeals that he got this year. So I recognize there are things that can be learned from my office. Looking back on it, I wish what I had done.
To come in and say, I'm not, really, I can't. do
Well,
it."
that, but, and I also wish that I had given city manager and the CFO a daily count of where we were at. But the point was that the budget was dynamic. It was changing daily. And I really wanted to give her a final firm number. That was my goal. But
Just couldn't get there.
we couldn't get there.
Well,
And-
is there-
And I have learned that lesson. I mean, I should have done it
Well,
differently.
I would say, and the final firm number is what we need, and we need to communicate that there's a certain date that has to be here. But I think the point is, as you're moving along and you're getting information from the assessor or the Board of Equalization, if you start seeing, you start out, and that was the point Tuesday night, you started out saying this is high, it's coming in higher, and then all of a sudden you came back with a difference in tax value that would have been $160-some million in assessed value. How do you not see that number? And in the case this time it was just a math error, but I mean, if that was the case, how would you not? You would see that through, it may be, different residential is going to be smaller amounts, but you would start to, as you're keying this in, saying, I put 100 of these in today, 3/4 of them went down. Maybe there's a trend here, and start looking at that so you can communicate. At least, you may not know the number, but what is trending. And I think that is one of the things in these projections and what we're asking, because you have in this other, not the real estate, but in the other things, by law, there's things you can't divulge specific businesses. We understand that, but that you can aggregate it in such a way that really what we need to be looking at are the trends and the amount of the trends. Even if it's not the absolute number, but just which way are things trending, because that helps us then to know, this is going down. We know some things are going down, but at what rate are they going down? How, and you have more insight into that because you can see the individual components that make that up, even though you can't give that information out. And I understand that, but that's, again, it's more about that communication and finding a way
I
to
agree.
share that information.
I agree. The reason I was having so much trouble Tuesday night explaining to you why I didn't see this calamity coming is the numbers that we had Tuesday night weren't the right numbers, and what I was seeing was not anything terribly alarming. I saw there were a lot more appeals than normal, and certainly I could tell that this was going to be an assessment where the value was gonna be pretty darn close to what it was last year. I mean, it looked like that, but that was within the confines of our budget. But I do agree with what you said. There needs to be better communication with the CFO and the city manager. And probably, like I said, probably I'm gonna recommend to Ms. Barker or whoever wins this job in the election, their general reassessment, that they do a daily communication. Every time that number changes from an appeal, that they communicate that to the CFO and city manager, so this problem doesn't happen again. But I do think it was a confluence of very unusual factors this year that caused us to be in this position that I've never seen before in my 16 years, and I doubt will ever happen again in this city. And I hope to God it doesn't.
Does the state of Virginia have laws dictating timelines for appeals, when they have to be
Yes.
cut off?
Yes, they
When the
do.
results have to be filed? It seems to me like there was no timeline acting here
Well,
unless.
technically, the Board of Equalization can hear appeals for an entire year.
Okay,
There's no reason why they can't hear appeals until the end of this year, because they're appointed for an entire year by the circuit judge.
okay.
Okay, so if that's true, then doesn't that by default mean that you don't have a new appraised value of the entire city's property until that process is done? So the only value you can use is the previous certified value that you're running on until that value is finished.
That's true, but in the past, the Board of Equalization has not had to set up additional hearings like they did this year. Once they went through their scheduled hearings, they had enough slots to fill all the taxpayers that had appeals. This year, they had to add dates. It's the first time that's ever happened.
Okay. Well, this last comment, every organization makes huge mistakes. This is a huge mistake. But every organization can also learn and get better and get healthier by those mistakes. So the
Amen.
silver lining here is the city manager and the CFO and the city attorney have a pretty big task now to figure out all the lessons learned here that caused this mistake, and to see what we have to do to change the city charter and the value do you use, or you're allowed to use by law until the next appraisal's finished, and everything you've listed here needs to be written into a new law and a new charter, so this is not allowed to happen again, and you have to be held to those stipulations.
I agree with you, Councilman Romero.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've sat and I've listened to everything, and I'm thinking, what's the root of the problem here? And I keep hearing you talking about the Board of Appeals. And it sounds to me like your department did not enter in all the data from the reassessment. Y'all sat on it and sat on it and sat on it, waiting on the appeals. In my mind, if your department had entered the new assessment as it was coming in, you would have got to the numbers that showed you're falling $168 million behind on real estate values, which should have set the light off a long time ago. In my opinion, I'm seeing your department went into a heated rush last week to bring us some numbers, knowing we're in the cycle for the budget, and it was a rushed effort, and it blew us all away. If these numbers had been entered a long time ago, months ago, you would have saw the trend that we was losing hundreds of millions of dollars in assessed values. Not the next day after you come to us and report it. That's huge. I don't think the numbers were entered until last week, in my
What-
mind, okay? So the next time in a reassessment, those numbers need to be added in, regardless of how many appeals there's gonna be. Because once those appeals are completed, those numbers can come back to your department and be re-entered in as a current new number. You see where I'm going with that?
I do.
And then you're able to give us a final number at the end of all the appeals.
I understand what you're saying, and let me say that once we went through the pro-val training, which was, I think, ended toward the end of February, every time we got an appeal decision, Lisa Hartman, my real estate deputy, entered it that day. But the thing you don't realize is, like the Board of Equalization, the way they did it, they heard a number of cases. And we, for the most part, we didn't get their decisions till after they'd heard at least the first time, and they had to schedule extra hearings. We got some decisions from the decisions from the BOE from their first group of hearings, but before the second hearings, and we got them all in one batch. So, you know, there was a period of maybe a month or longer that we didn't get any information.
But this
when we got it, we
168
entered it. and
This
we entered it.
$168 million did not come from the appeals. That number was already floating out there, and had your new numbers from the assessor been entered into the new system, you would have solved this trend that we're losing money hand over fist. And then you could have looked at the program a little closer and found the error a long time ago that you found Wednesday morning. But
I
you
had
should
some
not have
time to
been under the
reflect on
gun,
that.
because you should have been able to just push the button, print. The numbers should have already been in the system. You should have saw this a long time ago coming.
We even had numbers Tuesday that had to be put in. For example, the numbers from the Falls real estate involved a legal issue that involved some consultation with Randy and with the city manager and with David Leonard, the chair of the BOE. And it took a while to get to the point where we made a decision on what the city stand was going to be on that.
I understand that, but when was the first time your department done a printout to see where the numbers were? And what was the trend? When was the first printout?
I'll ask.
How long? 2 weeks ago. So y'all saw a $168 million default.
Uh, Yeah, there wasn't a trend.
Yeah, there
So
wasn't.
that should have told them that
And-
number they were gonna give us was wrong. 'Cause
Yeah.
there wasn't a trend of going down, so therefore, when they got a number of being that short, they should have said, whoa, this
Well,
can't be right.
Yeah, and one of
Because
the.
we have no trend of,
And one of the
values
things
drop.
I would think, just sitting here listening to this, is, you know, you have cases that aren't being, I mean, you know, I realize you're relying on a computer system, but sometimes it's good to do this in a spreadsheet. I could set up a spreadsheet, just dump it into a spreadsheet
She has
and
one.
do 3 columns. These real estate properties are not being appealed, so you know that number's gonna stand. These are the ones we've got back from the Board of Equalization or the assessor that has been changed, so you can see the percentage of change. These are the ones still outstanding, because you do know which cases they're hearing. They can tell you that, right?
That wasn't true of Wamplerines. They
But-
scheduled their own hearings.
But the Board of Equalization, like these 10 cases, you would know which properties, the amount. So you can see, so far this year, the trend is they're decreasing property 85% of what it was. So you can make an estimate and let people know, this is just an estimate. I mean, as you're going along, then that helps us in the budgeting. Because again, even the budget document, we have what we're going to talk about today and next week, and until we get to the point of first reading on it, it's a fluid document, and it's consistently changing, but you need to have the most up-to-date information to make the best decisions possible. And therein is, I think, the biggest problem here is the communication and trying to stay up to date on the information.
2
And I'll
weeks
leave it
ago,
at
we got
that.
a whole pile of assessments from the BOE. Lisa entered those. Less than 2 weeks ago.
let's just let it go. Get on
70,
with it.
we had 75 BOE decisions, week and a half ago? Week and a half ago. Those were entered immediately. But I knew that they had more appeals that they hadn't decided, and I knew there were still some out there. And in my mind, I wanted to give Tabitha a final firm number. And in retrospect,